Now on Daf Samach Beis Amid Beis. Ger Tzorich Shlosha. For Geris, you need at the time of the Tefillah a bezdin of 3, and we derive this from the pasuk Mishpat, which, with regard to Geris, the Torah says Mishpat Echad Yelachem, and that's in Bamidbar Tesvav, and the Gemara in Yevamos Mem Vav derives from this pasuk that you need a bezdin for Geris, so it's not Biyada. My time in Mishpat Kesiv Bay, Kiddin. So therefore, Mishpat is like Din, and just like Din requires a minimum of 3 dayanim, so too Mishpat in the case of Geris requires 3. How do we know that he'll find 3 dayanim that will approve of the Geris and will notify him of the mitzvahs, and then in their presence he'll be tovim? So it's not really biyada, and therefore if Mekadish Lachash Tisgari Lachash Tisgari, the Kiddushin is not chal. Maskif lo Rav Abba Bar Mamel Elame At, according to Yoshita Rav Yochanan, that if it's biyodo, then you can be mechel even on Davar Shalom B'Leil Man. No same pruta l'shivcha. So a man gives a pruta to his shivcha knainis, and he says to Rav Yomel, Hareyat mekudeshes li lachashesh tacharech, and he can be meshachara. Hochinami davi Kiddushin. Should we say therefore the Kiddushin is chal? Hochiyash, the Gemara answers no. Hasam, in the case of Shifra Kananis, may kara before the Shichrur is Kibehema. She's not considered a Bas Yisrael at all in the further sense of it. And the Gemara later on is going to say that Avodah B'Shifra Kananim Hukshu L'Chamar. The Gemara derives from Shvu L'Champo Imachamar. And therefore, Hashta Das Acheres. Now, she became a Birya Chadasha, has no shaykhs to her original status as a Shivcha, and therefore, even though Rabbi Yochanan speaks about biyado as if it was lad machus mais, but in this case, it's not called biyado, but rather, even though it's biyado, it's still considered machus mais because the davar shalom b'olam, and therefore the Kiddushin is not chal. Gemara asks the following kasha now. V'yela had the Amar of Oshia no same pruta leisha. The Amar larei mekudeshes lilachash hagasheh. Eino mekudeshes. Wait a minute. According to Rabbi Yochanan, it's biyado legarsha. Is hachinami the Rabbi Yochanan have a Kiddushin? Could it be that therefore, according to Rabbi Yochanan, the Kiddushin would be chal in this case? And the Gemara rejects it. The biyado legarsha, biyado lekadsha. Is it biyado lekadsha? Meaning, first she has to accept the Kiddushin, and then he could be megarisha bal korch. But we don't know whether she'll accept the Kiddushin or not. So now at this point, when he's already marrying her, it's not really biyada. And the Gemara clarifies, so according to this logic, Tivshel to boy Rav Oshia. Rav Oshia raised the following suffix. I know saying shtei prutas lisha b'pruta achas. Amar las kadshili ayom u'pruta achas. So the second pruta he says Amar li lo. He says to her, is kadshili achas hagarshech. Is would the Kiddushin Shniyah be chal after the Gerushin? Tivsha Minei, we should derive from Rabbi Yochanan the law of Kiddushin that this second Kiddushin would not be chal, and the reason for that it's not biyada lekadsha liachar shetisgarish, and therefore if someone else came along and he was mekadisha, it would be a valid Kiddushin. Gemara rejects it. Dilma, perhaps there's another svara that could justify why the Kiddush should be chal the second Kiddushin. Ki the tafsi Kiddushin hashta tafsi nami liachar kain. Just like if he wanted to be Kadisha now, the Kiddush would be chal. She's a pnuya. So too, he can be Kadisha liachar zman, meaning after the zman of Gerushin, and therefore it would be tafsi law. So it's not similar to the case of a man who gives a pruta to the Isha to be Makadisha after the Gerushin, because now she's married to him and it's not Piyota Lekadsha. Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, and this is going to support Rabbi Yochanan. Kavasi Rabbi Yochanan. Ein Tormin Mina Tolush Ala Mechubav Im Toram Ein Shumasa Truma Ketzad. What's the case? A man has 2 arugos, and in one of them he has peros that are still Mechuba Lekaka, and the other aruga, he's got pears that are already tlushim minakarka v'yoma, and he declares pears haruga zu tlushim you tmura truma al pears haruga zu mechuberes, or alternatively says peres aruga mechuberes. You true peres aruga zu tlushim lo amar klum. Aval im amar lichshe yitlashu v'nitlashu dvarv kayamin. If he says that he wants the truma to be chal after the tlisha, and then he went ahead and he was tolesh, then it's valid. The truma is chal, and we see clearly, like Rabbi Yochanan, that since it was biyado letlosh at the time that he was mafresh the truma, he could be tolesh. Is therefore, even though he wasn't tolesh now at the time of the afrosha, nevertheless, it's chal trumos. Yes, sir, I came. There's even a bigger chiddush in this Tosefta. Amar Reb Elazar ben Yaakov afilu Amar peres arugazu tlushim truma al peres arugazu mechuberes. Or alternatively, peres arugazu mechuberes, you truma al peres arugazu she'ena mechuberes. It's tlushiv lichshe yaviu shlish. He says, let the peres mechubarim, when they get to shlish gidulam v'tolshu, and then they will be harvested, then the truma should be chal. They view shlish v'nitlishu dvarv kayomen. And if the peres mechubarim reach a shlish, and then afterwards there was tlisha, then his truma is chal. Even though right now it's not biyoda, because the time of the afrosha, it hadn't reached the development of a shlish. And therefore, even if he would be tolish, now he would not be chayiv in truma because it didn't reach shlish. Nevertheless, dvar kayomen. Why? Because according to Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, a person could be magdish or makne a dover shadayin lo boli omagam. Amar Eliezer ben Yaakov elo bit shachas. Only if at least the tfuah on which he wants to be mafresh truma reached the shlish gidula, 1/3 of its growth. Aval biagam, if you have tfuah that now began to grow, and it hasn't reached any stage of rakim, it's not even soft yet, it's not royal klum, you can't do anything with lo omar, then the truma would not be chal. That's according to Rabbah. And Rabbi Yosef disagrees, omar afilu biagam. Since it is the very beginning of the gidul ha-tfuah, therefore, you could be torn from it according to Rav Yosef. Now, l'das chachom asom sheino the makne dov shlo v'lolam bein b'shachas u'bein b'yagam ein afrosha sochala. And comes along Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, and he says one of two things. Either he says that eino the makne dov shlo v'lolam only applies in the case of agam, because it really hasn't matured at all yet, but shachas okay. Or perhaps even in the case of agam, it's considered hascholas gidul hatu, and therefore bichal. Now, Rav Yosef said afilu be'agam, my mashma. What is the etymological meaning of the word agam? Hi agam lishna debutzlana. Agam of Rav Yosef means Dover hamivat space v'olam in a karka, and it means it's just beginning to sprout, and you could actually—it's so soft at this point that you could actually bend over its head. Amar Rabbi Elazar the Amakra, based on a pasuk Yeshaya Nun Ches, ha kozeh yetzom evchareu yomanos adam nafsho halachov ki'ag mon rosha. Is it the Ratzon of Hashem that only a person should be kofef komasa, kofef roshel, bend over, bow his head ke'agmon, which is a machat, it's a needle that is bent over, looks like a hook. It's used like taka, a hook to fish, get the fish out of the water. So Hashem wants a tshuva mitis. He wants a real, sincere tshuva. In any event, the Torah used the word agmon, and it means machat kfufa. So to hear agam means it's a nickname for tfuah shegidela ma'at, and it's still sore. You could bend it over. So that means it's not even royal achilas behema. Gemara says, Kiman Azla, whose sheet is reflected in the Mishnah that we learned here. Oh, Melech Haverim Yolda, Ishtecha, Nekeva, Mekudeshes Li Lomer Klum. V'Yomer Rab Chanina, Lo Shanu Ella, She'ein Ishtu Muberes. Avolim Ishtu Muberes, Tvar of Kayom. So a man could be Makadish a fetus in its mother's womb, and that's called Muberes, and Dvar of Kayom. And if it turns out that this fetus is an Akeva, which they didn't have ultrasound then, so she's Mekudeshes Lo. And it would seem that a person cannot be makna davar shelo ba'olam klal, but davar shemiksaso ba'olam, like the fetus that's beginning to form in its mother's womb, is even though it's not gomer, it's not complete, you could be makna. Therefore, if his wife is muberes, even though she didn't yet give birth to a daughter, then that daughter could be married off because she's miksasa ba'olam. Come on. According to whose sheet does reflect. If you're going to say like Rabbah in the sheet of Reb Chanina, that you can be mafresh truma only if the tefua is already 1/3 developed, is then it's not. Reb Chanina is not saying that in all cases a pregnant woman the Kiddushin is chal, but it's only kisha ukar ubra when the fetus is noticeable. And that means after 1/3 of its ibur is 9 months, means after 3 months. And that's the shir's man of those 3 months, which is chashiv be'ibura, and it's domed to the shir gedel of shachas, which is also 1/3 of its growth. So it's mixes ba'olam, mixes lo ba'olam, and therefore the Kiddushin is chal. But before that, when it's a davar shelo ba'olam klal, like through of agam, then it would work. The ikar of Yosef, you're going to have to add another point here. Afal pi she lo hukar ubar klal. Ikar di'ami, the Gemara says, I have another interpretation of Machlokas Rav and Rav Yosef in the context of Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. Amar Rabba says, Lo Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov el b'shachas debei kivsha. We're talking about a beis habal, which is saturated by the rainwater that falls from the heavens. And therefore, you don't need any maisa adna in order to continue the process of hatzmacha. So it's like his chila lavoliola. It's like beginning to come into the world. So even though it hasn't yet reached shlish, you could be mafresh from it and on it. Avol b'shachas the beishakya, and now we're talking about shachas hagdela b'stei beis shalchin in an irrigated field. Haskuka lashkas b'nei adam. Yislo Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, that you could be mafresh truma from it because it's possible that it won't work and it won't grow. The Beis Shachar. Right? So Rav Yosef holds that even in the case of Shachas Beishakya, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov holds that you can be mafresh many truma. Why? Because it already reached that level of development, which is like that of Shachas, and it's a davar sheba le'olam. Is keman azla hadis not in our mission says Omer Chaverim Yolda Ishtcha Nekeva Mekudesh Li Omer Lo Klum. Yomi Rab Chanina Lo Shanu El Kshein Ishto Muberes Aval Ishto Muberes Vav Kayomim. It would seem that Eino the Makna davar shelo ba'olam klal, but davar shemiktsasa ba'olam, even though it's not gomur, you could be makna, and therefore the Ishto Muberes, even though she hasn't yet given birth, the bas, if she has a bas, is mekudesh. That's called miktsasa ba'olam. Kiman. According to which sheet does this apply? It's after the first 3 months of conception. And then the uber is nikah. And both Rav and Rav Yosef would say that Lo Omar Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, when Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov took the position that Nitan Lahafresh Truma, that only applies Elo Keshikvag. Call again, whether it's Rabbi or Rav Yosef, according to both of them, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov would not say that you could be mafresh truma unless there's some gidul of tvua l'shir shel shachas. But less than that, as everybody agrees, that Kiddushin is not chal. And even according to Rabbi, only tvua gdel al megishamim, then chal and dvorav. But here is gamkin chalam hakidusha ibor isha is totally rak b'dei shamayim v'lo b'maisei adam. Amar Abaye, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, Rabbi Meir, kulam svir lo adam makli davar shelo liola. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov me'odam amar, as we saw before, that a man could be mafresh truma from peros that haven't yet completely grown, and they haven't even reached the state of shlish. But Rebbe, Desanya, where do we have Rebbe in a brisa? And that's going to be the brisa of Azhara lebezin shel yaskiru lebaila, which Mirz Hashem will pick up tomorrow. Thank you so much. Have a great day.